Welcome to Galaxy Brains.
An infinite amount of cash.
I'm your host, Alex Thorn.
The U.S. banking system is sound and resilient.
Bitcoin made a new all-time high.
If you're not long, you're short.
Satoshi's going to come on there, laugh hysterically, go quiet, all Bitcoin's going to be erased.
Bitcoin's the best crypto out there.
Bitcoin is going to zero.
Welcome back to Galaxy Brains, Bitcoin Not Zero. I'm your host, Alex Thorn, head of research at Galaxy. Thank you for listening. We have a great episode for you today. Congressman Ritchie Torres, Democrat from New York's 15th Congressional District, is our guest. He's in studio with us. He's going to explain what got him interested in crypto and blockchain and how and why Democrats need to get activated on this issue, why he's not a favor of the current approach of Democratic and administration leadership on crypto. It's a very interesting interview. Of course, we'll check in with our good friend Bimnet, a BB from Galaxy Trading, as always, to talk about markets. Before we get to that, I need to remind you to please refer to the link to the disclaimer in the podcast notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice or an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. This is an important episode with the Congressman. He's one of the leading Democratic voices in favor of a constructive environment for digital assets, and I think you'll love what he has to say. But first, let's talk to Bimnet. Let's go now to our friend Bimnet, a BB from Galaxy Trading. As always, Bimnet, welcome to Galaxy Brains.
Thanks for having me.
So we had CPI numbers.
Yes, we did.
This morning. It's Wednesday, August 14th. They looked mostly flat. I don't know. Unpack what you saw.
Yeah, so the headline month-over-month figure for core CPI came in at 0.17% month-on-month, and that was versus expectations of like around a 0.2. So really right in line. The components that saw strength were a little bit concerning because you had the shelter component print like in the 0.4s. But, that was mitigated by, slightly softer auto prices and used car prices, and slightly softer like airline fares than expected. And so, there's a little bit for kind of everyone. But high level, if you think about the trend that inflation has been on, I think the 3-month rate of inflation is like sub 2%. Like the 6-month rate of inflation is, right around 2. So the stuff is printing at levels that are consistent with the Fed's mandate. And that should kind of reinforce the fact that we are going to start to see some easing starting in September. Mm-hmm. I think in terms of, front-end pricing, you've got a lot baked in already. And so I think the bar for more aggressive or quicker cuts is kind of quite high at the moment. Just to provide some context for the audience, you have about 8 cuts priced in over the next year, which is a lot, mm-hmm. right? That's 200 basis points. And so, I think that's a lot. So if inflation came in soft, it was going to be really tough to price in that much more. And so now the market's kind of moving on and kind of looking at retail sales and employment figures. Retail sales are out tomorrow. You also have initial jobless claims and other employment data coming out over the next couple of weeks. And so I think the focus of the market is going to start moving more towards the employment side of the mandate.
Yep.
Because the price stuff kind of seems like it's settling down. And I think market reactions were pretty benign.
And all of that is supportive of cuts, right? I mean,
yes.
If unemployment is rising, prices are flattening, cooling, then it looks like green light for easing, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And is that the main macro story? I mean, are we still concerned about the carry trade in Japan, or I guess there's geopolitical questions, but like it feels like now we're in a cuts are coming. Winter is coming. The cuts are coming, right? Like that's the main sort of focus now, especially because it's August.
No, absolutely. And there's just not much else to kind of think about outside of the election.
Let's talk about that in a second too.
We can. I think in terms of the Japanese carry trade, the BOJ and the officials have kind of indicated that, they're cognizant of financial conditions and that, their next action is likely to happen after year end.
Yeah.
And so those, kind of concerns around Japan have abated.
So when they say that, it's code for like, we're probably not going to surprise hike again and cause more turmoil, right?
Yeah.
That's what they're saying, basically.
They're basically going to try to do it in as methodical and as measured of a way as possible, because markets have a tendency to overreact.
Right.
And so they're not trying to cause financial
So
instability.
it's assuring to the market.
Yes,
Got
correct.
it.
And so, that's kind of out the way. And I think the Iranian response to Israel is a little on the back burner, because, there were some headlines out yesterday saying that, the Gaza, peace deal is kind of close, and that Iran would not strike, if it seemed like there was
the negotiations or whatever.
Correct. And so some of those risks have abated. Oil started to calm down. Gold has started to sell off a little bit. And so you're in this kind of period where there was a lot of forced selling and unwind of positioning, and conditions have gotten better. And so risk assets are tending to trade a little bit better at the moment. Now, the question is, will they continue? And I think so, absent any big risk shocks. You're probably in kind of long and chill mode.
The fundamentals are not bad, right? Inflation's cooling, unemployment's going up, but it's not like terrible, right?
Yeah, I just think the market moves as a function of catalysts and positioning.
Yeah.
And the fundamentals might be not that good, but it's how many people really understand where the price to earnings is on Microsoft stock?
That's true.
Or Apple, or
nobody.
Not
many
people don't. That's not really what drives markets. It's kind of these panic and greed moments, and these positioning dynamics and options markets, and so you're kind of at that the drift market, and the drift
would
is
tend to
typically
drift
higher.
Yeah, because of people working, contributing to 401ks.
401ks. And
let's talk about Bitcoin and also the election a little bit.
Absolutely.
I think we've been of the view, I know you and I, I've said that outside of risk shocks you had there were a couple catalysts, positive and negative. You certainly had the supply overhangs, whether it's the U.S. government and their Bitcoin, or the Ethereum ETF outflows from the Grayscale complex, or other movements like that. Most of that has settled, right? GOX is fully distributed as far as we can tell.
Absolutely.
There's always U.S. government. The governments of the world hold a lot of crypto, so that can always surprise. On the positive side, though, or sort of mix, right? You also have this presidential election, and we've sort of said that, to me, that's literally, I'm not really creating or changing a thesis when it comes to from now until that. Especially if the Harris-Walz campaign were to come out extremely against crypto, whereas you have the Trump-Vance campaign being extremely pro-crypto. What do you think? Do we trade range bound for the next couple of months? To me, that's the biggest catalyst. I mean,
I think.
And we don't yet really know, by the way, on the Harris-Walz campaign what their position is on crypto.
Yeah.
Not really.
No, but I would have thought that if you were worried about a tight election, that on an issue where you could pick up votes by not moving that much, you would have already done it, I think.
And so you're a little pessimistic on Harris-Walz.
I'm very pessimistic about them.
On crypto,
taking a more nuanced stance about it. Because, I mean, you'll get into this with the guest upcoming, but I genuinely don't understand where the antagonism for crypto comes from. It is democratic, being able to send money back home,
anywhere, anyone,
banking the unbanked, and some would say that there's been a lot of good created by crypto, a lot of employment, jobs. Right. And so I don't necessarily know where the straight up antagonism, this is so bad for people, I got to be so anti it, and just the lack of let's meet at the table and kind of discuss things comes from. And so I'm not optimistic, because I haven't seen that side really engage in a way that is constructive.
Yeah.
And all we're asking for is engagement. It's not even you need to be pro crypto aggressively. It's engage.
Right.
And so and put people around you that have been engaging.
Yeah.
And so it is concerning, the stuff you highlighted in your tweet.
Yeah.
But the way I would think about it is I'm a trader, and I think that you went from a Trump polling in a kind of an extreme level where, he's really favored to win, 65% odds, to now where he's extremely unfavored in the standpoint of, I think the predicted odds are around like 44, 45%. And so I think that's probably a local extreme for his odds.
Yeah.
Particularly given that you have debates coming up, and a debate can single-handedly flip the perception of a candidate. And right now, what it seems like is that, Kamala hasn't really been forced to tackle anything up front, real policy nuance and stuff. And so I do think that the debates give Trump an opening to change perception. And what we have to keep in mind is that the election comes down to a handful of counties and a handful of states.
Yeah.
It is not a nationwide election.
It's not, no.
It's probably like 25 counties in the U.S.
Yeah, 200,000 voters maybe will decide
Right?
this thing.
And so, you can't, it is a coin toss, and it will naturally move towards a coin toss. And so I think the relative probabilities are an extreme. That's not a political position or a political view. That's just the nature of the electoral college and the nature of battleground states. And so, with that in mind, I think that as you get closer to the election, I think you'll probably start to see crypto trade better, because part of the reason why crypto's come off is because of that Trump probability coming off. And so I do think that as you kind of approach the debates and the elections, kind of that upside risk to crypto has to be part of the distribution curve for folks. And so if you're thinking about a Trump presidency as being BTC over 100K, right? Like, as time approaches the election, and if we start to see Trump's probability going back to more of a coin toss, that should be positive for Bitcoin. In addition, I do think that being in a benign environment for risk assets, if you're not going to get these crazy 4 or 5% down days in the NASDAQ, and it's going to be like that slow churn of earnings and buybacks and, just folks DCAing into the market, then that should generally be good for crypto. And so, I'm watching the politics. It's going to be super important. And I think it's a lot closer than people think.
Bimned Abibi, my friend from Galaxy Trading, thank you so much.
Pleasure for having me.
Let's go now to our guest, Congressman Ritchie Torres, Congressman from New York's 15th District. Welcome to Galaxy Brains.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited because it's getting political, as it does every 4 years. We're in the summer leading into the presidential election. And for the first time, it feels like crypto is very much on the ballot, or a very active part of this campaign. And you've been an outspoken person on this topic in Congress, and one of the few in the Democratic Party that has talked positively about the impact crypto can have on the world. So I know our audience is very happy to hear from you, and thanks for coming. Before we get to deep into crypto, I'd love to know what got you interested in politics, what your sort of philosophy is, political philosophy, if you have an answer for that.
Well, I will confess that I'm not your typical member of Congress. I do not have a net worth of $1 million.
Is that the average net worth?
It's the average.
Wow.
I do not come from a political family. I do not even have a college degree. I'm one of the few without a college degree in Congress. But what I lack in formal credentials, I make up for in lived experience. I know what it's like to face poverty and inequality, housing insecurity and food insecurity. These are not abstractions to me. These are experiences that I've lived in my own life. And so I often govern from a place of lived experience. I was born and raised in the Bronx. I spent almost all my life in poverty. I was raised by a single mother who had to raise 3 of us on minimum wage, which in the 1990s was $4.25 an hour. And I grew up in public housing, living in conditions of mold and mildew, leaks and lead, without consistent heat and hot water in the winter. And so the central mission of my life has been to radically reduce poverty in places like the South Bronx.
Has inflation hit your community worse? Does it than the broader country? I know the country is in general dealing with significant inflation over the last few years.
Look, inflation is the ultimate form of a regressive tax. It has a disproportionately destructive impact on the lowest income communities of color. There are people in the Bronx who are struggling to cope with the cost of groceries and gas, and it's taken a real toll, and I've seen it firsthand.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but on a net total basis, consumer goods are up like 30% in a couple years, and that's a significant change. What is it like to represent New York in Congress, too? I mean, New York City is an iconic, massive, I think of it as the center of the universe.
Yeah.
Maybe that's, I think maybe my friends in Tokyo might disagree with that, but I mean, it's certainly one of the most important cities in human history.
Well, your friends in Tokyo are wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, we are the center of the universe.
Yeah.
I mean, New York City is a miniaturization of the globe. It's a cosmopolitan city where almost 200 languages are spoken. We are a magnet for people from every walk of life. We are the center of finance. We're a leading center of technology. We're a center of healthcare. Whereas cities like D.C. are largely centered around the federal government, politics, New York has a panoply of cultural and institutional assets. And so for me, it's just endlessly dynamic and interesting
Great
to be a New
sports
Yorker.
as well.
Great sports. The Yankees,
Yeah.
foremost among them in the Bronx.
Yeah, you're a big fan of the Yankees.
I mean,
I've seen.
even in my area of the Bronx, we have the New York Botanical Garden, which is the best in the world, the Bronx Zoo, Yankee Stadium, Arthur Avenue, Little Italy,
Yep.
which has the largest concentration of small businesses owned by the same family for more than 100 years.
Wow.
Some of the best Italian food in the nation. And that's one neighborhood in New York City.
It's a fascinating city. I have to admit I do come from Boston, but I will say even a 6-block radius in most parts of New York is frankly a better city than most of Boston by itself. Great city, for other
I'm
reasons.
not going to disparage any other city, but
Yeah.
I love New York.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you another question. You're one of the youngest members of Congress.
Yeah.
Without giving away our ages, you and I were both born in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
When will our generation have a bigger say in politics, or is it coming?
Well, I'm happy to tell you my age. I'm 36. I'm no longer young, but I'm congressionally young.
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Politics has become a gerontocracy.
Yeah.
I often joke that I'm a member of the most prestigious and powerful senior center in the United States. And I'm often asked about term limits.
Yeah.
I'm skeptical about term limits because there is something to be said for institutional memory. I feel like as a member of Congress, the issues that we tackle are so complicated that you cannot master them overnight. You can only learn them over time by osmosis. And so you see the value of a member of Congress who's thought deeply about an issue for decades. And of course, if we were to impose term limits, you're simply shifting power from the elected officials to the unelected bureaucrats, which is part of the problem.
I see.
And I'm sure we'll explore that issue in greater depth.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I do feel like there should be an age limit. We could debate what the age limit should be. There should be an age limit for all 3 branches of government, Supreme Court, presidency, Congress. I do feel like there comes a point at which you should exit the stage gracefully and create space for a new generation of leadership. So I'm much more receptive to age limits than I am to term limits. But there is a breed of elected officials who feel they have a God-given right to die in public office.
Yeah, it is strange to actually literally hold your office until death. That is strange to me.
It's like marriage,
right.
till death do us part.
Right.
There's almost something undemocratic about it because it should be about public service and the transformation of public office into a personal property right.
Yeah.
Strikes me as corrosive to our democracy.
While we're on this topic, obviously July was one of the most impactful political months that I've ever seen. One of the most notable occurrences was President Biden exiting the presidential race.
Not to mention the attempted assassination of one nominee and the withdrawal of the other.
Right,
So
right. I mean, a total.
who saw that coming?
I know, and it's a total reshaping of the political landscape.
There's more volatility in politics than there is in crypto.
That's true. Actually, there's even more volatility in some major stocks than in Bitcoin at this point, too. So, but yeah, I wanted to ask you because you said that Congress, I suppose, but politics has become a bit of a gerontocracy. Obviously, President Biden.
Yeah.
I mean, if you looked at him when he was running 4 years ago, he was just visibly, significantly, more sharper in his debate skills, for example. You were one of the folks I saw reported that was advocating for a change. What was that like? Can you tell us about, why and has the change been positive?
The change was necessary, and it's been a game changer.
Yeah.
I mean, if President Biden had remained at the top of the ticket, it would have been an electoral catastrophe. We would have lost everything. The presidency, the House, the Senate. And with Vice President Harris at the top of the ticket, there's been a transformation of our political fortunes. Like, we're well positioned to win the presidency, win the House, and we may even retain the Senate. 2024 is going to be a turnout election, and there is more voter enthusiasm, more momentum on the Democratic side, more earned media on the Democratic side. So I feel bullish about the Democratic ticket.
Yeah, it does seem like the energy, there's significantly more
And
energy.
Trump is imploding because he built his whole campaign in opposition to Biden. And now he sees the world around him collapsing, and he's panicking and lashing out and running scared. So but one of my favorite words in the English language is schadenfreude. So I'm experiencing some schadenfreude watching Donald Trump implode.
If it is a Democratic president, let's transition a little bit into crypto policy, which you've been very active in and I think been one of the strongest voices. And I'm going to say supportive of crypto, but what I really mean is, open, fair, yeah, open, not overtly hostile, interested in. So I think that's one of the main reasons we wanted to talk to you, because this is not a politics podcast, as our audience obviously knows. What got you interested in crypto? I'm going to get to the questions about the Democratic Party and Vice President Harris and Tim Walz if they're elected, but what got you interested in crypto and blockchain?
I have an interest in crypto from a variety of perspectives, right? I have an interest as a representative of the South Bronx, which is one of the poorest geographic areas in the country. I have an interest in crypto as a New Yorker, because New York historically has been the center of finance, and crypto represents the next wave of finance. And I have an interest in crypto just because of technology. I mean, for me, crypto is a profoundly revolutionary innovation. It's going to radically decentralize the internet, creating a new layer of the internet known as Web3. It could radically decentralize the financial system. And I'll offer you a concrete, I'll explain what I mean through the prism of the Bronx. So, the traditional financial system has fundamentally failed the lowest income communities of color. I have constituents, immigrants, who pay exorbitant fees simply to transfer their own money abroad, remittances. Mm-hmm. And according to a study commissioned by the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs about a decade ago, the lowest income New Yorkers in places like the South Bronx and in Southeast Queens pay $200 million a year in check cashing fees.
Wow.
$200 million a year.
And so this is, you don't have a bank account. You have to go to
if you're unbanked and underbanked, you're wide open to predation. And even if you do have a bank, you have to pay overdraft fees and all these hidden fees that crush you when you're living at the margins. And so I came to realize that, crypto and blockchain could be a game changer for the most economically vulnerable among us, right? The ability to digitize a dollar in the form of a stablecoin, and the ability to move a digital or tokenized dollar at the speed of the blockchain has the potential to create a better, cheaper, and faster payment system, and to liberate our financial system from all the rent seeking that has driven up cost and brought delays to the lowest income families.
Yeah, it is impossible too if you are only saving. We know that the dollar has, all fiat currencies, they inflate over time, right? The purchasing power degrades over time. And the answer that I'm often told is the only way to then to save long term is to invest, right? And even just in stocks would be a good, invest in equity indices or something like that. So even if you have a bank account, you still don't really have that typically, right? So one of the most interesting ideas for me that we've been looking at since I was looking at Fidelity, we've been thinking about here is, yes, the actual straight up NASDAQ, the NYSE, can we somehow make this much more accessible so that everyday people can save for the future.
And stablecoin can do an enormous amount of good, not only for Americans, but for people across the world. It can bring a stable currency where none exists, and a currency that operates independently of a corrupt foreign government that often steals from its own people.
Yeah.
But we've saw that crypto was instrumental in delivering aid to Ukraine.
Significant donations in crypto.
At one point, I think Venezuela had an inflation rate of more than 53 million percent. 53 million percent.
Yeah.
Right. So the people of Venezuela have no access to a stable currency, and stablecoin or cryptocurrency can provide a stable currency where none exists.
What's one of the most interesting things you've learned as you interact with that's a strong thesis, by the way, I think, for crypto, but what's one of the most interesting things you've learned as you've met with industry leaders, learned about crypto? Is there something, you've mentioned stable coins, I agree, very powerful segment. Is there anything else in, what are your thoughts on Bitcoin or DeFi, or do you have any?
I have a fascination with blockchain.
Yeah.
And I view it as a transformative, all-purpose technology. And I had a conversation with someone a few days ago, but one of my favorite books is Yuval Harari's *Sapiens: A History of Humankind*. Mm-hmm. And his thesis is that we as humans are exceptional. We have an exceptional ability to cooperate flexibly on a mass scale across space and time. And the basis for our ability to cooperate is our ability to create and tell stories. And it occurred to me, and someone drove this home for me, that probably the greatest catalyst for cooperation in the world is going to be blockchain. That blockchain is going to enable human cooperation on a global scale in areas that we cannot even presently imagine. And that's what excites me most. And what I love about blockchain is that it's something of a paradox, right? It reconciles values that we thought were contradictory, right? It manages to provide transparency, radical transparency,
right,
without sacrificing security and privacy. And it provides privacy and security without sacrificing transparency, right? It manages to enable global cooperation and coordination without central intermediation. And so that to me is just intellectually mind-blowing. And I love it, and I'm excited about the world of possibilities that's going to be opened by blockchain.
It's a great answer. Let's talk a little bit about policy. Some of the legislative proposals, bills that Congress, that really the House Financial Services has been very active, that committee. So I've got a few questions about a variety of these issues.
Sure.
One of them is, and I think you've alluded to this too, about foreign governments, hostile governments not being able to take people's wealth, or individuals being able to save that. That custody issue is one of the core. The ability to self-custody is one of the core capabilities enabled by digital assets. Congress hasn't really done anything on this. Do you think there will be any action on either protecting, or are we worried about that there'll be some kind of inhibiting of people's ability to self-custody? Because it is, if there's a hostile government, one of the most dangerous features, quote unquote, right?
No, it's a fair point. I think we in Congress have prioritized stable coins and market structure. We've spent less time on custody. I am sympathetic to the notion that people should have the right to custody their own assets, but it's not something that we have fleshed out extensively in legislation.
Yeah.
I know I have colleagues who have introduced bills on self-custody, but there's been no bipartisan negotiation around the concept of custody.
Yeah. Let's talk about market structure.
Yeah.
Before we go to, I'd love to ask about thoughts on FIT 21 or DCCPA in the Senate or whatever, but let's first sort of go to the core of one of the issues, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission's approach. I mean, really forever, but certainly over the last 4 years to digital assets. How would you characterize the SEC's stance on digital assets of late?
I strongly disagree with it. It runs contrary to how I approach issues. I feel like we have a simple mission, those of us both in Congress and in the administrative state, right? Our goal should be to create a framework for regulating crypto that enables the best actors to innovate while filtering out the worst actors, right? We should create fair, orderly, and efficient markets. We should provide protection for investors and consumers. and we should enable people to innovate, which is the lifeblood of entrepreneurial capitalism. We've seen the opposite from Gary Gensler, the Grinch that is Gary Gensler. Instead of regulation, we've seen the weaponization of government against the crypto community. He is adamantly against lawmaking and rulemaking on crypto. Right? He prefers regulation by enforcement because it enables him to act arbitrarily and capriciously and to ambush crypto businesses with Wells notices and enforcement actions. For me, regulatory clarity is not a buzzword. It's the cornerstone of compliance, right? Imagine, Gensler is the equivalent of a traffic agent who is excessively ticketing every driver for speeding without telling them the speeding limit. I feel like we have an obligation to tell people the speeding limit. John Marshall said the role of the judiciary is to say what the law is, right? Well, we in Congress and we in the executive branch should say what the law is. We should say, here's the definition of crypto securities, and here's the definition of crypto commodities, and here's the process by which a security can eventually morph into a commodity. I feel like we owe it to the industry to provide clear definitions in order to enable compliance. But instead of enabling compliance, Gensler's intent on setting the industry up to fail. And we get mixed messaging, right? So under federal law, commodity and security are mutually exclusive terms.
Right.
The CFTC has said that Ether is a commodity. The SEC has said that Ether is a security. How can you possibly comply when you're receiving two conflicting directives from the two market regulators? And then the SEC has had an ever-changing position. First, it said that Ether was a commodity, and then it said that Ether is a security, and then it says it all depends. Those are impossible circumstances under which to function as a business. And I feel like, for me, it's not only about crypto. It's about, do we in America want to have a culture that is conducive to innovation and entrepreneurship?
It is definitely different, right? Crypto is not, because the part of the way Chair Gensler has danced around this problem is to say, well, we have these securities laws. They were written to be flexible, but I'm pretty sure like an Orange Grove contract, and from the Howey case, really doesn't look like a distributed computer network to me, right? I mean, do you view it as fundamentally different? It requires.
I feel like crypto is so qualitatively different from anything we've seen before that it requires a framework, a statutory framework from Congress. And I had an exchange with Gensler in which I gave him the Pokemon hypothetical. I said, if you were to sell me a Pokemon, are you engaged in a security transaction? And at first he hesitated, but he eventually said no. And I said, well, what if you were to sell me a Pokemon via the blockchain? He said, it depends. I'm like, why would it depend? Like, why should the process of tokenization magically transform a commodity into a security? And he claims to be tech neutral, but it's clear that he's interpreting the concept of investment contracts in a manner that's meant to discriminate against crypto and meant to sabotage crypto. So I see the game he's playing. And the politicizing of the SEC is to an extent that we have not seen before.
There was another item that's different, but also from the SEC, this staff accounting bulletin 121.
For me, that was the worst that he's done, because what the staff, first of all, it's not a rule.
It's supposedly non-binding guidance is what they claim.
It's not a law.
Right.
It never went through the legislative process. It's not a rule. It never went through the administrative process. It's simply guidance, but it has a coercive effect because no one wants to run into the buzzsaw of the SEC. But essentially, the thrust of SAB 121 is to tell businesses, this new technology, blockchain, you cannot innovate with this new technology. And for me, there's nothing worse than telling a business you cannot innovate. You cannot experiment with new technology. Like, technological experimentation is the lifeblood of American capitalism. It's what distinguishes us from the rest of the world. Right? We have built American leadership on the strength of our technological supremacy. And so there's nothing worse than to tell a business you cannot innovate. We are prohibiting innovation. We are criminalizing innovation. It's insanity to me. Like, of everything Gensler done, that was actually the most offensive, both procedurally and substantively.
So you voted along with 21 Democrats in the House for, I guess, a measure of disapproval under the Congressional Review Act to overturn this. The Senate passed that same overturn, and then I was kind of blown away. President Biden vetoed it. Why did he veto it? Do you have any idea why? Or, I mean, is it, to me, it seemed like they have to, like, signing it into law would effectively agree with the repudiation of Gensler, who obviously is the chair of the SEC.
I mean, I disagreed with the position the administration took on it. And for me, SAB 121 is not even about crypto. It's purely about blockchain.
Yeah.
Like, there are figures in finance like Jamie Dimon, who's a prominent critic of crypto.
Yeah.
But he sees the revolutionary value of blockchain.
Yeah.
And so to have guidance that prohibits businesses, banks, from even experimenting with blockchain is inexplicable to me.
Let's talk about banks a little bit more too, because that was a truly wild one. I will point out that when the Biden the statement of administrative guidance from the White House on the Fit 21 bill after it had passed the House was much more conciliatory. Perhaps they learned that, and it was also quite a bipartisan vote. I mean, many more. I think 70 Democrats voted for Fit 21, which is that comprehensive market structure bill out of the House. But on the bank issue, the Fed has also done things to prohibit banks from touching crypto. I always wonder about this because the actual statutory mandate in the Federal Reserve Act is for the Fed, they call it this dual mandate to promote price stability, aka prevent too much inflation or deflation, and to try to maximize employment, right? Or care about employment and inflation, basically, are the two things. Yeah. But they have a massive bank regulatory role, and they've put out guidance that also, along with the FDIC and the OCC, the national bank regulators, that also prevents banks from even running a blockchain node, let alone holding Bitcoin or Ether for that matter. Has the Fed gone too far in bank regulation, which isn't really technically one of its, like, we have other agencies whose job that is?
Well, I strongly object to the weaponization of government against crypto, whether it's coming from the banking regulators or coming from the SEC. I prefer rulemaking and lawmaking, which is subject to public accountability and transparency. Banking regulation in America is more of a cacophony than a symphony. Like, it's spread among 3 banking regulators: the OCC, the FDIC, and the Fed. And then within the Fed is not only in charge of banking regulation and supervision, which failed miserably in the case of SVB, but it also sets monetary policy. I'm skeptical. Look, I think there's no desire in Congress to radically redesign the system, but it strikes me as unwise for one agency to do monetary policy, banking regulation, and banking supervision.
Seems like a lot. They also do payments.
That seems like it's overextended.
Yeah. We're running short on time, so I want to ask you about the political landscape here and the Democratic Party and crypto. We're recording this on Wednesday, August 14th. Later tonight, there's this call, Crypto for Harris, which is there have been, part of the energy you described before with the new campaign is there have been tons of these calls, right, of different constituencies showing support. I saw comedians for Harris. We haven't heard anything. I looked. I don't think neither Vice President Harris nor Governor Tim Walz have ever said the word crypto on record. So we don't actually know any of their past history on the issue. Do you think that a Harris-Walz administration will be more or less constructive on crypto than the current Biden administration? Or do we not know yet?
We don't know with certainty yet, but we have reason to be hopeful that Vice President Harris represents a reset. And we've seen outreach from the Harris campaign to the crypto community, signaling a desire for a reset. So I feel like the community should make every effort to forge a relationship. The rule in politics is make friends before you need them. And And now I'm a partisan Democrat. I'm all in for Harris, but I'm gonna set aside my partisan lens for a moment. You know, if you're an industry like crypto, you need to have a relationship with both sides. I feel like those in the crypto industry who are putting all their eggs in one basket, who are aligning themselves exclusively with the Republicans, are doing the industry a disservice. Like, there is no such thing as a one-party strategy in a two-party system, because, you know, the power will change in Congress and the presidency, and the industry wants to be able to succeed no matter who controls the House, no matter who controls the Senate, no matter who controls the presidency. So just like diversification is a form of risk management in the stock market, it is likewise a form of risk management in politics. You need to have a relationship with both sides. You need to ensure that the issue is either bipartisan or transpartisan.
And it makes sense to me. I mean, I agree. I strongly believe that blockchain technology, Bitcoin and Ethereum in particular or specifically, are inherently nonpartisan. First of all, they're apolitical technologies. They're widely decentralized. They don't emanate from one party's politics or another, in my view. I think there are interesting things you could label as libertarian or classically liberal in both directions, right?
No, I've described blockchain and crypto as a Rorschach test.
Yeah.
On which you can project your own ideological preferences. You know, a libertarian might love blockchain because it's radically independent of the government.
Right.
A progressive might love blockchain because it's radically independent of corporations and could be a tool for lifting up the vulnerable. A social conservative might love blockchain because it promotes community and civil society. So each of us can see our own ideological identities in the revolutionary technology that is blockchain.
One last question. I mean, if Democrats, it remains to be seen whether the Harris-Walz administration or candidacy will embrace or discuss or be more constructive on crypto than President Biden's administration has been. But do you think there is a crypto voting bloc in general? Are there, whether it's young people or people that own cryptos, from a political standpoint, is there a group to win here?
My view has evolved, because originally I would have said no. But, you know, the fact that we've seen outreach from the Harris campaign suggests it reflects a recognition that there is a crypto voting bloc. And keep in mind, the presidency is going to be won at the margins.
Yeah.
A few votes at the margins can have massive consequences. It can determine the outcome of the presidential election. And so a block of crypto voters in swing states has outsized power, and it's worth pursuing. The answer to your question is yes.
Congressman Ritchie Torres from New York, thank you so much for your leadership on crypto, and thanks for coming on Galaxy Brains.
It's always a pleasure.
That's it for this week's episode of Galaxy Brains. Thanks to our guest, Congressman Ritchie Torres, Democratic congressman from New York's 15th District, and our friend Bimnet Abibi from Galaxy Trading. As always, everyone have a safe and happy weekend, and we will catch you next week. Thanks for listening to Galaxy Brains, the weekly podcast from Galaxy Research. If you enjoy the show, please like, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To follow Galaxy Research, sign up for our weekly newsletter at gdr.email, read our content at galaxy.com/research, and follow us on Twitter at GLXY Research. See you next week.